That's okay, Jack. Welcome to today's technical health chat. This health chat has been organized by UNICEF, ECDAN, the Aga Khan Foundation, Aga Khan University's Institute for Human Development, with the support of LEGO Foundation. So just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please feel free to introduce yourselves using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And when posting, please select all panelists and attendees so that you introduce yourself to everybody. And let us know your name, which country you're joining us from, and your organization. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A tab. If you put them on the chat, we might not be able to locate them. And you may send your questions at any time during the health chat. We'll be addressing the live questions towards the end of the session. So the topic of this health chat is care for child development implementation with a focus on supporting parents and caregivers. We have developed a series of case studies about implementing care for child development in different contexts in East Africa and Latin America. And the goal of the series of case studies is to help practitioners and other stakeholders who want to implement CCD in their local and national settings by providing examples of best practice and lessons in CCD implementation. Now we received many questions on this topic, and we thank you all for submitting your questions ahead of the health chat. We have with us a panel of experts in this field who will help us to discuss these questions and provide examples from their vast experience. My name is Joyce Marango, and I'm the ECD Hub Manager at the Aga Khan University's Institute for Human Development. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today's panelists. With us is Dr. Boniface Gakobwe. Boniface is a recognized early childhood development expert with over 20 years work experience in development and management of programs. He is currently an ECD specialist with UNICEF HQ in New York, where he leads the nurturing care, public financing, and partnerships components of the program. Previously, he worked as an ECD specialist in the UNICEF Rwanda, Malawi, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania country offices. As a CCD master trainer, he has vast experience in adaptation and implementation of the package in different contexts. Prior to joining UNICEF, Boniface managed ECD and humanitarian programs at Save the Children and UNDP. Boniface's passion is to continue advancing the global, regional, and national ECD agenda by building stronger partnerships and increasing relevance and uptake of childhood development services. Welcome, Boniface. Our second panelist is Amina Mwitu. Amina is the Regional Early Childhood Development Advisor at Aga Khan Foundation, East Africa. And her role is to provide strategic and technical leadership in AKF and its partners in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Before joining AKF, Amina worked with the Madrasa Early Childhood Program, an affiliate of AKF, where she served as a program director for 8 years. Amina holds an MA in Education and International Development from the University of Central London, BA in Sociology from Kenyatta University, and a diploma in ECD. In addition and work in ECD, Amina works with many girls and women and volunteers in multiple initiatives to promote their well-being. Nice to have you, Amina. Our third panelist is Eladio Jimenez. Eladio is an ECD officer in the UNICEF Dominican Republic country office, and since 2018, he has been supporting UNICEF's work to strengthen the country's capacities to provide quality services to children and their families in early childhood. Eladio has led the implementation of care for child development in different areas, including through faith-based organizations and public services, particularly in the health sector. In addition to ECD, Eladio is currently responsible for the country's digital education strategy. Eladio holds a bachelor's in education and a master's in technology, education, and learning. Thank you for joining us, Eladio. We shall now proceed with the questions. The first question goes to all the panelists. Please tell us about your experience with the Care for Child Development approach and playful parenting, and why this is important for child development. Let's start with you, Boniface.
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thanks all for connecting. Let me also appreciate the Lego Foundation for the support and the partnership. In terms of what I've done in CCD, as we have heard in the introduction, I'm a master trainer of CCD. And beyond the training, I've been actively involved, in the implementation. For instance, I was part of the team that introduced the CCD in the Sierra Leone country office. That entailed the training and even adaptation of the package within the existing programs then. Same with Malawi, introducing the CCD in partnership with government counterparts, and also ensure that it's integrated into existing programs. For the past 4.5 years, I was supporting the same implementation in Rwanda. Now, in my current capacity in the UNICEF headquarters, I'm coordinating implementation of the CCD. Why is CCD important and how is it linked to child development? When you look at the package, you're going to pick some key fundamentals. There are elements of play and communication that are very key to ensure that children develop and learn and also reach their full potential. But critical is the interaction between the caregiver, the parent, and the child. That is very critical for CCD, and CCD has come in to bridge that gap. Instead of just looking at the child perspective, but we're bringing in also the parent, the caregiver, to ensure that there's kind of interaction. And in a way, there is their bond that is created, there's a strong attachment, and there is also the opportunity to stimulate the child so that they can develop. So CCD is such a package that is, handy, practical, easy to navigate, and integrate into existing programs. But critical for child development is that ability to allow that good communication between the parent, the caregiver, and the child, and also to ensure that there's play. Because as we know, play is the business of the child. Children learn better through play. So these are the fundamentals that are in CCD. So that's who I am, that's what I've done, and that's how CCD is linked to child development. So over to you, Joyce.
Thank you very much, Boniface. Amina, what do you think about the link between playful parenting and early childhood development as an approach that used and as Boniface has described? Could you build on to that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As mentioned, I work with the Aga Khan Foundation, and briefly about our experience in implementing care for child development. We started almost a decade ago when we came together, 6 countries from East Africa and Asia, to be able to really look at the package as it is and be able to adapt it to our different contexts. And at that point, we felt that it really came handy because with the experience that we had in the ECD space, we felt there were gaps around holistic care that needed to be addressed. So CCD, particularly in the area of play and communication, was really welcome because really helped us to bridge that gap and to be able to ensure that children that we were working with, serving in the communities, were able to get that quality early start. So basically, we started with adaptation of the tools and contextualizing them. And to this point in time, we as AKF team in East Africa, the Madrasa Early Childhood Program, and globally, we are in the process of also developing additional resources, such as a competency framework for training the health workers that deliver these programs. So to add on to what Boniface has said in terms of why playful parenting is important, I know he has mentioned about the bonding and the secure attachment, but I wish to go back to that research and what research is telling us over the last few years around the criticality of those early years, particularly 0 to 3, that it's really a period where there is concentrated brain development. And that through adequate stimulation, we can be able to really influence the kind of connections that are being made in the child brain. So these connections are really triggered by adequate, responsive and careful and playful caregiving. So it's really important that we empower the parents to be able to understand what goes on inside the child and be able to support that development. So for me, whenever we are talking about care for child development, particularly playing and communication, it's not just about playing for the sake of playing, but it is really about what that play does in the child's brain, his or her overall development and well-being. So really to encourage everybody to understand that when we are talking about playful parenting, care for child development, we are looking at an investment into our children's life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina. Eladio, what can you add about care for child development and its importance in child development?
Well, since Boniface and Amina have already talked a lot about what it does for the child, I would like to take the time to talk a little bit about what it does for the adult. Because one of the beautiful things for me of CCD is the fact that not only are we investing in children and their development, but also we are contributing to changing behavior in the adults. Because one of the things that we know today is while the child's brain is so much more malleable at the early stages, 0 to 3, as Amina mentioned, it is also true that the adult's brain is also somewhat malleable. And when we are able to provide parents with the tools to communicate and play correctly, we're also working on that parent's brain. And one of the things that come out of that and it's been our experience, once the adult gets to see what's happening with that child, they get to recognize that child's trajectory because of what they're doing, their behavior towards the child and towards the family also changes. And I think that one of the great advantages of working with CCD is the fact that we can also contribute to modifying behaviors in terms of violence reduction, in terms of also mental health of the adults around the child. So I think that the importance of working with CCD goes on both directions. On one end, what it does for the child's brain, but also on the other end, what it does for the family and for the adults around that child. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Eladio, for those insights on the benefits to the parents. So our next question goes to Amina, and it's on behavior change. So Amina, what strategies or approaches can be used to best engage parents in care for child development and playful parenting beyond imparting knowledge to ensure sustained behavior change?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce. Yeah, the strategies and approaches that can be used are really diverse, depending on the needs of the communities and the parents in the different contexts where they live. Beyond imparting knowledge on playful parenting or care for child development, for me, the next step is really seeing how this knowledge is translated into practice. So I will go back to looking at the skills of those who are working with these families, you know, and the parents. And here I'm really looking at the skills of the frontline workers, be they health workers or the ECD educators or the community-based facilitators. And many a times, these frontline workers are volunteers who might have the passion, so to speak, but might not have the prerequisite skills and competencies for them to be able to effectively support the parents. So for me, there is need for us to think about how we are building their capacity to ensure that they are able to support the parents effectively. Down to the other approaches, you know, I'm looking at coaching and mentoring as a powerful one. And this is where I can say, this is where the rubber meets the road, because many a times, even us as adults, we go to trainings, but we do acquire the knowledge, but how many times do we translate it into practice? So coaching and mentoring really helps the parents and their caregivers to be able to get the guidance, the support, and the encouragement that they need so that they're able to actually overcome the obstacles that might be hindering them from practicing whatever they have learned. So I believe it's through coaching and mentoring that parents are able to be confident and overcome whatever might be there. I'm looking at opportunities where we can bring together parents as peers to learn and to reflect. And I want to give an example of an approach that we have used here and mainly used in the nutrition circles called PDHAC, Positive Deviance Approach, where we have seen parents come together, learn about something, and then come back and reflect on the positive changes or the positive practices that they've been able to do, and sharing the results with their team members for them to get inspiration and encouragement. And we have seen quite a number of parents who have been hesitant being able to pick up from these sharing moments and also being able to implement, you know, and so on. And I want to give an example of a case where one parent and the children, all the children in the family started developing toys for the little ones. And when she was able to share this, the other parents felt that, you know, it was a good thing. And they quickly came together as a team within the community to develop materials for children. So I think those opportunities where we can create to bring together families, to bring together caregivers, to be able to reflect and learn together is really critical. I just want to mention one more for the sake of to give time for the others also to respond, is really around the integration of ICT. I know, we know the digital divide is real in the communities where we are working, but we have learned the hard way during the COVID period, you know, and how, you know, the use of technology really helped us to be able to reach families and so on. And we feel that it's something to embrace, and really, how can we be able to use it in a positive way so that parents and their children can be able to benefit from, you know, activities, be able to benefit from information, to benefit from linkages and support from the other people that are out there, other parents that are out there, and so on. And lastly, really, it's around the integration of gender responsive playful parenting into policies, both in terms of the national level, subnational level, and ensuring that there are adequate structures in place to be able to support implementation at the ground level. Yeah, that's a very quick one from me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Amina. I would like to mention to the audience that the link to the Care for Child Development package has been shared in the chat box. So anybody who might want access to that, please feel free to click on that link. Now, one of the main questions that came from the audience was on male involvement or father involvement. I would like to pose this question to Eladio. Please tell us what strategies can be used to improve fathers' engagement in playful parenting in the support of young children. And also, please elaborate on some of the learnings from your experience in engaging fathers in care for child development.
Thank you for posing that question. It is one that is near and dear to my heart. I would like to start with one of the strategies that Amina mentioned, coaching, and it's essential for involving parents, families in care for child development. However, with the fathers, with male caregivers, we have to be intentional. It cannot be something that just happens by chance. And in fact, it sometimes does, but we have to be intentional in making sure that we get them involved. And how do we do that? In our experience, we have to meet them where they are. And that means many times ensuring that, for example, when we have included CCD in home visitations, we intentionally schedule some of these visits to happen at a time that we know fathers are home. So if we can move them, push them back to the later time of the day, for example, or even on weekends in some cases, we make sure that we can do that so we have the parents there when the sessions are happening. Another thing that it's very important is involving the workplace in this in this type of sessions. In our experience, working with the private sector to ensure that we have spaces in the companies to share information, but also to share practices and simulations with fathers and male caregivers in general has proven to be a very interesting tool. We've had grandfathers come in after the sessions tell us how much they have wished they knew these things when they had their own children, but they are grateful that they have the opportunity of knowing it now that they have grandchildren, and that they will make sure that they implement them with their grandchildren, and also let the fathers know how to be better in their own words. Another thing that it has shown to be a powerful thing is sharing with fathers what it does for the child. Because many times when we see how we are supposed to communicate and how we're supposed to play with children, it might seem like a waste of time for parents that didn't have that growing up. So sharing what happens in the child's brain is also something that has shown to be important. On the other hand, there are some things that we, as the ones that I've mentioned, that we do with fathers and for fathers, that we do them directly with them, but it is not enough. At least in our experience, there's other situations, other conditions that need to be addressed as well. And one of them has to do with how do we, what is the narrative that we have behind parents' involvement? For a very long time, the narrative has been, it is your responsibility to be there for your child. And while it is true, it is insufficient. It is also true that it is a child's right to have you there, and it is also your right to be there for your child. And being able to communicate this as part of the rights of both the child and the father has proven also to be important. Lastly, I think it is very important to also advocate for an enabling environment. And what I mean by this is, in the case of the Dominican Republic, fathers are awarded only 2 days by law to as parenting leave after your child is born. 2 days is evidently a very short time to really create the type of bond that is required at that age. So part of the work that we have been doing is advocating for extending that parenting leave so that fathers can actually be there from the beginning. Also ensuring that they have the time, allowed the time to go with the mothers to visitations during pregnancy, and after the child is born, going to the doctor with them. So in short, on the one end, we have to be intentional in making sure that we are there where fathers are to give them the tools that they need to be to communicate and play correctly. But on the other hand, we have to also work on ensuring that the environment it's one that enables them to fulfill this responsibility and this right. Over to you.
Those are some really insightful ways to promote father engagement. Thank you, Eladio. This next question is to you, Boniface. How can care for child development and playful parenting practices be promoted among rural and remote populations?
Thank you very much, Joyce, for the good question. Talking of the rural or remote population, I think let me start by reminding ourselves, I think the dynamics that exist in a rural or remote setting. Let me highlight three things. One, these are communities or these are populations that are identified by low education levels, and I'm saying that with due respect. But when you go to a remote area, a rural area, it's known and data is there that you find that there are low education levels. And another parameter that is so dominant also is the resources. They are not available. So these are resource constrained populations. And also even access, because once we talk of rural areas, most of those areas are not accessible. Even when it's raining, it's not easy to go. So in terms of accessibility to those areas, it's also a challenge. So I'll speak to those three parameters: low levels of education, resources being limited, and also in terms of accessibility. So in terms of education, as we implement CCD, as we promote playful parenting, the best thing we can do is also to look at the context itself. Let's have materials, content that fit the context to the level of their understanding. Because once we take that it fits all, and we take the way we do in urban areas, the way we do it in areas where maybe we are talking of a population that is, education levels are a little bit high, we are not going to achieve the objective. But it's that understanding that I'm having a population, I'm having an audience with this level of understanding. How do I adapt CCD? How do I adapt, the strategies of, promoting playful parenting? So it has to fit into that context. And we usually talk of adaptation. Adaptation is a well-known word, but when you talk of adaptation of CCD, it has to go beyond translation of the language, the pictures, because I think what most of the documents I've seen, we are just changing from English into another local language. But we don't take time to sit down and say, how relevant is it? Looking at the examples of the games that we are promoting, we need to have games that they can associate, that they can relate. So within that context, within the rural setting. So this is another dimension what we need to consider as we try to implement CCD in those areas. The cultural relevance of it, because whatever we promote, whatever thing we are trying to do, it has to be relevant within the cultural setting. So that has to be aligned to the level of understanding, the level of education of the audience, in that particular context. And we also talked of the resources. These are resource constrained, populations. I know, and we know that the essence of CCD is to promote, play using the locally available materials. But again, we need to look at that environment and say, what kind of resources are available in that community, in that rural population. Then we need to ensure that we program to align to that, because that's fundamental and that's very critical when it comes to implementation of CCD. I also talked of limited access. These are some of the places, as I said, in terms of to reach, they had to reach areas, climbing mountains, crossing rivers. Those are the kind of populations I'm talking about. But how do we capitalize on that? So for example, if there's a frontline worker, an implementer who is implementing CCD, how do we capitalize that when I go to the home, I ensure that I do the best to use that opportunity, because I may not come back tomorrow. Unlike in urban settings where you can jump into a bus, where you can just pick a motorcycle and you go and you cross, and you're already there to the home. You can have the luxury to go as much as you want. But these are the kind of populations that are marginalized, they're far away. So the moment you go there, you need to capitalize and ensure that, you deliver the best message possible, because you may not have the other chance soon. Again, as they come to the health facilities, for example, they are coming for routine programs to the health facilities. And I'm now talking of the families, the parents going with their children to the health facility. How much are we going to capitalize that? Because this person, this family may not come back tomorrow because of the accessibility and the challenges which are there. So that's why I'm a believer of integrating CCD and playful parenting into existing programs, because by doing that, we ensure that we are going to bring the efficiency, the effectiveness, and even better use of time and the resources. So Joyce, if you ask me, colleagues, if you ask me, how can we do it in remote or rural areas? These are the kind of things I'm highlighting. We need to understand the context, then build on that and maximize on the opportunities which are there. Then we are going to achieve the objectives. But if we continue, taking as we do in another normal setting, we may have challenges. So those are the kind of thoughts I can share at this stage, Joyce, to ensure that even those communities are saved in terms of CCD. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights, Boniface. And I can assure you those are some of the things that came up when we were documenting the case study in rural settings in Nairobi, in rural Kenya, in the coastal region. So yeah, I would like to move on to the next question, and this is for you as well, Boniface. Please tell us how CCD and playful parenting practices can be promoted among parents who are juggling many responsibilities to support their families and may not have time to engage in play.
Thank you very much, Joyce. We are using the words, they are busy, they are juggling, and they may not have time to play with their children. And again, once we say they are busy, the temptation is to say, okay, these are the urban populations. These are like the opposites of what I was talking earlier on, but it's not. Even once we go to the rural areas, they are busy, they are going to their farms, they may not have the time. So I just want to underline that in my responses, let's not look at one audience, but it's across the board, both in the rural and even the urban. But the starting point, yes, we are busy. Yes, parents are busy, but it's that understanding. There is this saying that where there's a will, there's a way. I'm a believer that, once people understand, once I understand, like myself being a dad, once I understand and embrace the value of play, the need to have time to communicate with my child, even within my busy, schedule, I'll be able to find somewhere, somehow. So I think my key message on that point is that understanding that, yes, I'm busy, but how much can I do? So to make sure that people understand and embrace the value of play that is critical. It's that understanding that is going to bring change. And we are using the words playful parenting. I want to highlight that play parenting is not an event. We are not talking of, okay, now I want to do parenting. Now I want to play with my child, but it's a routine, it's ongoing. So from morning to the end of the day, yes, maybe the person is at the office, the caregiver is at the office, but the time you are at home with the child, it's ongoing. So asking that question to say, how can I engage with my child even when I'm preparing a meal, even I'm on a table, even I'm driving, taking my child to school, ironing clothes, I'm just giving the examples. The time, yes, we are busy. Yes, the parent is busy, but the time they're within they're at the home, how can they help to ensure that, the child is also getting the attention? And my colleague mentioned of family-friendly policies. It's also important, talk of the paternity leave, the maternity leave, given time to take care of the sick child, time to breastfeed. So I'm now speaking to organizations, the policy makers, employers. How do we create that kind of environment so that, yes, the parents are busy, but they can be given the opportunity to also, support, child development. And that way, there's also reduction in terms of stress among the parents, and that is going to help. So yes, it's a reality. We are busy, parents are busy, but at least space can be created. And in that way, we have a good well-being and a good mental health, for the parent. And that way, they can ably support the development of their children. So thank you, Joyce. Let me stop there.
All right, thanks, Boniface. At this point, I would like to remind our audience that if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A tab, and our panelists will do their best to address as many as we have time for. Now, a question to all the panelists. How can parents of children with disabilities engage in playful parenting with their young children? And also, what adaptations can be made to care for child development and other approaches to support children with disabilities. Could we start with you, Eladio, on this one?
Absolutely. When we started working with CCD in the Dominican Republic, one of the areas where we decided to focus was precisely with services for children with disabilities. And one of the things that we found to be the biggest challenge wasn't actually parents, it was actually service providers. One of the things that happens many times, and we've seen it over and over, is that there is this idea of the need of a specialist to be providing care for children with disabilities, and that parents, because they are not the specialists, they do not know or they can't be there with their children. When we started working with the service providers to realize that working with the parents in providing the parents with the tools to communicate and play with their children was a better alternative, that changed the game completely. And it made such a difference. I remember one case where we were at one of these centers for children with disabilities, and we had seen this child. She must have been 4, 5 maybe, and she was receiving some therapy there, and the service provider was really struggling with the child, and the grandmother that was there was just on the side, just looking, and if you ask me, suffering because of how things were being handled with her granddaughter. When we asked them to allow us to work with the mother in a session of orientation from the CCD perspective, and the service provider saw how the child reacted to the play session, it was like the service provider had seen for the first time what was possible with a child with disabilities in terms of interaction. And it was so much so that about a month later, when we went back for another training, we found that same family, and this service provider was actually on the side telling the grandmother what to do, which, if you ask me, it's a huge change for this type of service. So basically what I'm trying to say is working with children with disability does not suppose a radical change in terms of what CCD is suggesting we do. We work with care for child development regardless of what the condition of the child is. It's a matter of providing parents with tools to be able to identify the need of that child, understand the signal, and provide a response in time. And that happens whether there is a disability or not. And I'm going to take the chance to answer one of the questions that I saw in the chat in terms of what to do with children with disabilities. And the question seemed to suggest what to do so that they become normal. And the truth is, care for child development is about understanding those needs and responding to the needs of the child. It's not so much about changing the condition. There might be a situation for which the parents will not have a solution, but regardless of what the condition is, there is still an opportunity for interaction. There is still an opportunity for play. There is still an opportunity for communication. Might be different from one child to another, as it would be with any child without a condition, without a disability. The thing is, how do we support parents to understand that they can still communicate, they can still play, they can still parent that child and have a bond with them. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Thank you for that, Eladio. I would like to see whether, Amina, you have something to add regarding CCD for children with disabilities. You're on mute. You're on mute, Amina.
Sorry, I didn't realize. Okay, I was commenting on Ladio and saying it's very interesting the way he brings things out. I want to mention that in our work in East Africa, we did not have a particular focus on children with disabilities, but the reality is that these children are there, they're in the communities, and many a times when the community health workers will go out, these children sometimes will be hidden because of the stereotypes that exist in the communities. But because they're part and parcel of the communities, they will still come back to us and say, you know what, this is happening. How do I support such a parent in the community? And what we will really encourage them to do is to have a conversation with the parents and let them know that play is a universal language, and whether that child is sick or has disabilities, there is still one or two things that a parent can still be able to do with that child to help them to lighten up and to help the caregivers connect with their children better. It doesn't matter whether this is just an eye contact, a smile, a touch, you know, a toy, or singing, or even having a loving conversation. And it really doesn't matter whether that child is able to respond to that conversation or not. Just encouraging the parents to be able to talk, to be able to sing, to be able to smile. The most important thing is for the parents to be able to continue taking cues from these children, keeping them engaged and never giving up, no matter what. We also encourage parents to be very realistic in terms of the milestones and the progress they're making with these children, and to understand that their development is different and they need to take it one step at a time. So that's what I can say at this point. Joyce, thank you.
Thanks, Sabina. Do you have anything to add, Boniface, regarding this topic?
Yeah, thank you very much, Amina and colleagues, for ably presenting the answers. But when you talk of children with disabilities, sometimes we also forget about the caregiver, the parent. Let me come to reality, closer to reality. When you have a family X and there's a child with a disability, what goes in the mind of the caregiver, the parent? There are many questions. Stress, talk of medical bills. There are many parameters. So the more I speak to parents with children with disabilities, the more I realize that themselves, they also need help. So there is a growing body of evidence, talk of the Lancet series, the UNICEF ECD programming, guidance, talk of the nurturing care framework. There are many frameworks which are out there. They are all pushing us to say, we are expecting a lot from the parent, we are expecting a lot from the caregiver, but what about their emotional well-being, their mental health? So yes, all of us as parents, those who are parents, passes through the same, but the dimension, the magnitude of stress is different. So as we're expecting to implement CCD, especially in those families where you have a child with a disability, we also need to stop and say, how can we help the parent themselves? How can we help the father, the mother, so that we also address their mental health? Because if we don't do that, they are not going to do all these things we are talking about. So for us to realize that optimal child development, we also need to take stock and support the caregiver. Some of you might have heard of the caring of the caregiver package that we are putting up together, UNICEF and other partners. That's the whole aim. Much as it's universal, it's going to reach to all parents, but we believe that it's also going to help a lot, parents with children with disabilities. And colleagues, another dimension we also don't talk much. What if we have a caregiver with disabilities? So it's not the child, but it's the caregiver themselves, it's the parent with disabilities. Again, we are expecting them to support the child development, the whole family. But again, we need to address that so that we also have, the necessary support that we want. So if you ask me, Joyce, how can we do it? That's the starting point, address the emotional needs of the parent or the caregiver. So the parents now should understand also that though the child has disabilities, but there's a way they can play, there's a way they can communicate. Because the practice or the tendency is to just say, okay, the child has disabilities, then I cannot communicate. But there are ways, there are options where you can use to play with that child. Then you equip them with the necessary skills so that they can, communicate and play accordingly. There's also a component of adaptation of CCD and the packages that we are developing. If you look at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, there is an emphasis that, people with disabilities and their families, through their representatives or their organizations, they should be consulted actively whenever we are developing or implementing policies and programs that affect them. But sometimes we think for them, sometimes we think on their behalf, but active, dialogue with them, listening. And in that way, we are going to develop games that are practical, that are relevant. I said earlier on, once we continue just adapting by changing English into the local language, changing pictures from another continent to put pictures into for those people in that specific continent, it's not going to change. But we need to listen, make it practical, make it real, listen to them. What is it that is happening within their homes? In that way, we are going to have the results that we want. So those are the kind of things I think in terms of adaptation, we need to consult through their bodies. Then we are going to have insights that are going to help us, have good play and communication as we integrate within our packages. So Joyce, those are some of the thoughts I can share at this stage in terms of implementation itself and also how we can adapt, the packages. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. And I think one of the most common questions from those who registered for this help chat and generally around CCD is around contextualization and adaptation. I would like to pose a question to the panelists. In what ways can care for child development be adapted to different cultural contexts and embrace culturally relevant concepts of play? And also, please tell us what your recommendations are for adapting CCD and other playful parenting approaches to different contexts. So shall we begin with you, Amina, on this one?
Okay, thanks, Joyce. When you're talking about adapting care for child development to to embrace cultural aspects, one of the things that is really key for me is that deep understanding and appreciation of that culture where this adaptation is taking place. Knowing what already exists there, what is working, so that you can amplify the practice. When we are coming with an intervention, we should not assume that we are beginning from a clean slate. There are already practices there in place. So we really have to understand what's happening, what's not working, and where can we intervene. And also looking at other opportunities that already exist within the system. A package like CCD is not meant to be a standalone package. It's meant to be integrated within whatever is happening within the health system and flowing naturally in the course of implementation and in supporting the parents, whether it is during the home visits or during support and care at the health facility. It also calls for understanding of what's negotiable and what's not negotiable in that cultural context as far as childcare and play is concerned. Being able to understand the boundaries as we seek to present and demonstrate these best practices for possible integration. I will also say that embracing cultural relevant notions of play by putting the communities and the families at the forefront of designing playful parenting programs. We as development partners should play the role of facilitators and be able to bring together the communities and whatever resources are there for us to be able, for them to be able to design and implement interventions that are sustainable and that address the needs of that particular community. So yes, adaptation is something that is a must. We have had this throughout the presentation. We have had it from Boniface, whether you are working with rural communities, with the poor communities, and so on. It's an ongoing process. There is no one particular point where you will say, I'm done with the adaptation. You continue to scan, you continue to engage, you continue with the conversation, you continue with the dialogue with the communities until you're able to get to something that is effective and impactful to the community that you are working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina, for that. Eladio, what would you say is your experience on this aspect of contextualization in the Latin America region?
Well, for us, it's a matter of asking a series of questions similar to what Amina was mentioning. And one of the first questions that we've been asking is, what services are available in the communities? And the reason we ask this question is because, as Amina said, CCD is not supposed to be a standalone a project or service. It goes embedded into the practices of services that are already established. And understanding what services are available, what type of providers do we have in those services, is the first step for us to determine what needs for adaptations we have. And the reason why we say this is, many times we've had places where you have doctors as the closest provider to the family. So the training and the practices that you would do with a doctor are not the same as a community service provider that may not have the health background as the doctor has. So starting with the kind of training you do, you would have to make adaptations in terms of the terminology, the intensity, the follow-up that you do, the number of trainers that you have. And this is just from the perspective of implementation of CCD in a community. On the other end, you have questions about what are the practices in these communities that seem to be working or not, and how can you intervene with those practices to provide parents with better tools for their practices as parents. So in many cases, we have gone from providing materials for parents to creating workshops where parents learn how to make certain materials, how to make certain toys, how to, beyond those orientation sessions where we work with them on how to communicate, on how to identify the children's needs, but also how do they best take advantage of the things that they have in their surroundings to promote their child's development. So adaptations come down to understanding what's available and how do we use that to better serve parents in their process of being the best parents they can be.
Hey, Boniface, would you like to add something on the aspect of contextualization?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Maybe quickly, let me just say, sometimes we need to ask ourselves, who is doing the adaptation? And is informed by what? Because I think that's very critical to ask ourselves that question. But colleagues, you may agree with me, even before we started using the term ECD, before we started using the terms parenting, CCD, there was already something happening in the community, something in all these settings we're talking about. So sometimes it's good to just listen, promote those traditional stories, promote those traditional games, and incorporate that, in our frameworks. That way it's going to be relevant. So we are building on an existing, foundation. So I think I asked myself, I was posing that question, who is doing that? Who are they consulting? Who are they talking to? So capturing that kind of information so that it's informed on things that are practical and happening within the setup. And secondly, let me finalize by saying, even when you're saying adapting into existing programs, it's again the way we market it. Because if I'm talking to Minister of Health, I don't need to introduce CCD as a new thing, but it's within the programming, within the parenting program of the existing programs within the countries. Then I just need to make some adjustments to align to that. But sometimes we have used the term adaptation as if it's something formal, as if we are introducing something new, but it's taking it from that lighter perspective to say there's already something taking place. And in that way, once we do that, we are going to become so efficient and the best stream of time, because frontline workers are already stretched with multiple roles and assignments. So those are the two things I can highlight at this stage, Joyce and colleagues. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. Colleagues, we thank you so much for your insights on the questions that have been submitted. We're now going to take a few questions from the Q&A, and thanks to the audience for submitting these questions. And I will start with a question on the, okay. This is a question from Rolindes Yovsi, and Rolindes is asking, why is care for child development a bit problematic for African parents living in subsistence communities? I know, Boniface, you have worked with communities, rural communities, and in terms of implementing care for child development. And as a master trainer, implementing CCD in different contexts. I don't know whether you would like to take this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I've supported implementation of CCD in East Africa, Southern Africa, and West Africa. One factor that is common for subsistence farmers, these are agro-based economies. And by subsistence, they are basically in the field, planting crops, taking care of animals. And this is more like the daily thing. So why is it problematic? As I indicated, we have marketed CCD and parenting as an event. We have not brought it to whatever they are doing. So they are taking care of their goats, their animals, they are cultivating, they are preparing, their gardens. I'm not saying take children so that they work. But what I'm saying is in their routine, their day-to-day activities, ensure that it's integrated. So for me, what I've seen is the more we want them now to come home, sit down and say, now let's start doing it. It's not going to work, but integrate it within their daily programs. In that way, it's going to be efficient. So yes, it has been a problem, but I indicated the educational levels, that kind of understanding. So if you connect the dots to what I said earlier on, that way we are going to have the breakthrough, because these are the neglected areas. I agree with you, and we can't afford to sit down. We have to do something, and the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. So there is a question on care for child development in emergency contexts. I would like to pose this to any of the panelists that has worked on CCD in emergency contexts. And the question is, how can care for child development be used to support caregivers in emergency contexts?
I'm sure both Boniface and Amina may have many things to add to this. I just want to mention one thing. In the case of the Latin American region, CCD became a very important tool, particularly with the recent pandemic of COVID-19, because it gave an opportunity to parents to find ways to better cope with the stress, to reduce the stress that was being created by confinement. At least that was the experience that we had in the Dominican Republic, where providing parents with ways to better communicate, to play, to do things along with their children became a tool to reduce stress. And Jane Lucas mentioned in her comment on the chat how important it is that caring for the caregiver And in some sense, during this health emergency, one of the things that we found was that parents had a way of coping with it because they had tools to better to be better parents, so to speak. On the other hand, in situations of conflict, in situations of other type of emergencies, we also know that one way to reduce the impact that those emergency situations have on children's development is by providing parents with the tools to help them cope with it. In other words, being able to identify the needs of the child, being able to identify those signals that they give us of what's going on with them, and being aware of it, interpret it correctly, and therefore being able to provide a response to that need. It's critical in situations of emergency. It is important all the time. However, we know how displacement, how conflict can disrupt children's lives, and how then, if the parents are equipped with the proper tools, this can become a way to reduce the impact of these situations on children's development.
Thank you, Eladio. Boniface or Amina, would you like to add anything concerning care for child development in emergency contexts?
Yeah, maybe Amina is also going to add, but let me just start by saying ECD in emergency in general is an area that we need to advance. We need to define what we mean by ECD in emergency and ensure that all the technical pieces that entail ECD are also embraced. But I need not to emphasize and agree with the person who posed the question that in terms of play, it's a gap. Yet we know that in an emergency setting, the stress levels, just having an opportunity to play for a child, it means a lot. Even for the caregiver, it means a lot. But it's an area that we really need to explore and advance. But I agree with that, it's an area that we have not, done as expected. But we have no choice but to just ensure that we integrate or incorporate CCD. And I also mentioned the caring for caregivers and all these, playful parenting aspects. We just have to ensure that they are mainstreamed, and, we can't afford to miss that, because it's an area that we need to advance. But maybe Amina has something to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Amina?
Yeah, thanks, Boniface and Eladio. And I won't say that we have any experience, or I have any experience working in emergencies, but I just imagine the situation there, and just the gaps that are there, the emotional stress that is there, as mentioned. And I imagine play being very therapeutic as the first therapy for both the child and the caregiver. The potential that play has in terms of really calming down the mental stress that is going on in the parents and in the child. So I want to believe that this is where play and communication is really needed, but not to forget that the parents are going through a lot of emotional and mental issues at that point in time that also need to be taken care of if they are to support their children better. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. And just to add that one of the case studies that we developed was based in Syria. And as an emergency context, there are quite a bit of learnings from there, including how to maximize existing services, although the situation might be fragile, but just how to utilize whatever is existing to be able to ensure that playful parent, care for child development continues even in the event that the systems have been weakened, and that there is a lot of, just generally, a lot of distress and chaos during that situation. So we will be sharing with you the link to the case study that was done in Syria as well in the follow-up communication. So I think we do not have a lot of time remaining. In the remaining few minutes that we have, I would like to give an opportunity to all of the panelists to give us a word in terms of what their recommendations are in terms of continuing or advancing care for child development activities, and to ensure that there is impact and that impact is sustained. So any of you could start.
Thank you very much, Amina. Thank you very much, Amina, Joyce, and colleagues. As we're forward, CCD, playful parenting, it has to find space in the national policies and frameworks, because these are the ones that anchor everything we're talking about. So wherever there's opportunity, there's a policy review, strategic plans being reviewed, let's ensure that we work with the government counterparts for ownership and sustainability, and also push, for financing of the same, to ensure that, resources are provided and are made available to ensure that, the programs are implemented effectively. And again, in terms of coordination, platforms like these, wherever there's opportunity, this is a time where we have made connections. So let's continue sharing notes, continue the discussion. There are questions in the chat that we don't have time to respond, but we'll go back to the same and reflect. So thanks all for joining us and for taking time to be with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I totally agree with Boniface in terms of the policy formulation, but I also want to go to the other end in terms of the practice. Yes, it's great to have those policies in the first place, but how are we translating these policies into practice? Many times we find very great policies, but when it comes to the structures, being put in place to ensure that they're being implemented at the grassroots level, that is where sometimes we find gaps. So let's do the policies, but also let's invest, let's have resources in place, structures in place, the right human resources, the right training to ensure that we are able to deliver high quality programs that are impactful to our children. Thank you.
Well, I agree with both Boniface and Amina. And the one thing I would like to add is we need to get as close as we can to the families, to the parents, to the caregivers. Because yes, we need to ensure that it is embedded in as many policies as possible, because that is also a part of ensuring sustainability and part of ensuring that with changes in political field will not change the practice at the service level, but also we need to make sure that we get to the families where they are. So that will mean working with everyone. We cannot leave any service, we cannot leave any institution that reaches the family, we cannot leave them out. The more we work with civil society, the more we work with faith-based organizations, the more chances we have to reach families and provide them with the tools and the experiences that they need to support their children's development. So for me, that would be also key. Let's get as close as we can to families.
So thank you very much, Eladio, Boniface, Amina. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all we had time for in this afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you to our excellent panelists for making the time to share their experience and knowledge in this health chat. Thank you very much. We didn't get to all the questions today, but we hope that you continue learning from the available resources on care for child development implementation, and the links on the various case studies and adaptation guidelines that we have mentioned in this session will be shared with you in the follow-up communication. So on behalf of the organizers and all the partners who were involved in putting together this health chat, thank you all for attending and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you, colleagues.
you.